Chapter 12. Viper got back to the camp to find the bonfire burning low and the place deserted. At least it seemed empty at first glance. He checked a couple of the cabins, including the one where the geeks had been held. He also tried the store and the lab. Nobody. Following the breadcrumbs, so to speak, he saw footprints in the dirt that told him everybody had gone in the same direction. He strode quickly up the path toward the lake, calling as he went. "Hey! Anybody here?" he yelled for maybe the 10th time. Nothing. Not even the AI that was supposed to answer. He stopped for a minute and listened. He could hear talking and saw smoke drifting up in the distance on the other side of the lake, and headed around the large body of water. Damned artificial world, Viper thought as he trudged around the lake. The whole damn place annoyed him. He didn't mind a session in a virtual reality lab. Back when he'd been a free man, he used to hit the arcades regularly. Some of those virtual babes had 3 tits, and their flesh felt pretty damn real to him. But this place, it was all false. He didn't know if he was stepping on real ground or imaginary ground or what. He did know that everything he was seeing, except maybe the cabins and a couple other buildings, was just an image, some of it floating in the air. Some of it was pretty good. The trees, the lake. If you looked close enough, you could see through to the other side. It all just made him mad. This and that jackpot at the military complex. Man, was he in trouble. Whoever this Jason guy was, he'd either left the military complex already, or he'd been killed when the soil covered up the bottom half of the building. Either way, Viper didn't deliver to Crowley, and he knew the price he'd pay for that. And it was all that bitch Blister's fault. Whenever he got to where everybody was sitting, he was astonished. It was like some damn campfire, everybody sitting around it all cozy and everything. What the fuck? The guys were there, and those fucking kids, including the hot little blind one, and Blister looking all smug and comfortable. Well, he'd fix that real fast. JJ noticed him and said, "Viper, where you been?" "Around. Took a walk." "Sit." Viper thought it might look suspicious if he dragged Blister away first thing, but he did toss her a look that said, "You're gonna get it." He grinned at the fear in her eyes. He took a seat next to the blind girl. She moved away from him like he was poison. He was just reaching out for her when that bitch Amanda said, "Don't." "Fuck off," he said, shaking his head, and looked at the water. What in the hell was going on here? "I'm telling them about this place," JJ said. "Listen up. It was set up by Castillo, in conjunction with the military. This lake is a hollow replica of a lake on the original Earth that existed around the year 1980. They named this one after the original, Crystal Lake. This lake has a lot to do with Jason. He was born near it, and some bad shit happened to him near and in this lake." "So there is a Jason," Viper said. "That's right." JJ gave him a look as if to ask, "How did you know about him since you just got here?" Viper watched him glance at Blister too, and could tell from the stupid way she sucked on her fingertips that JJ knew something was fishy, but he didn't say anything. "The lake on the original Earth is connected to Jason. When he was mortal—" "What do you mean, when?" Brad asked. "Look, if the guy was alive in 1980, and he's still around, then he's not exactly human anymore, is he?" JJ asked. "Point taken," Brad said. "Back on original Earth, when Jason was mortal, he had a lot of bad shit happen to him, and around it. From what we found out after Castillo died, this Jason led a pretty twisted life. He had a mother from hell and started killing people from a young age. And the number of attempts on his life, well, let's just say it's about equal to the number on mine. But at least those close to me haven't tried to take me out." He looked at Amanda, who smiled, and then turned to Viper, who did not smile. "Anyway, when they set up Moon Complex, it was totally around the project Castillo was working on, to create the perfect killing machine. None of us who were hired on at the camp knew about that, of course. Amanda and me were young, full of enthusiasm and energy, in charge of a lot of the camp, including the girls who were here as campers. And by the time we found out there was something else going on, it was too late. Castillo was able to resurrect Jason with the help of the AI Major Tom, which became the brain that ran the body, if you want to think of it that way. Then, when everything went to hell, Jason killed Castillo. I think what you guys said today makes sense. He nodded at Free and the others. You haven't heard from your AI because it's still communicating with the original AI, which, it looks like, created another Jason. Even if AI number 1's programming was cleaned out and chips were removed like your guy Jackson told you, there's still Jason number 2, and somebody or something is running this program. My guess is that it's your AI. But I keep saying and nobody is listening, Linda said, her voice tight with fear. The one I saw was in the basement. You guys saw it, she said to Free and Sky. Yeah, we did, Free said. And if the basement is buried, we don't have anything to worry about, do we? If it's still buried, JJ said, then there's nothing to worry about, except for the AI. At the very least, the AI is or was our link out of here. Hey! They all turned at the intrusion. About 20 men made their way toward the circle. They all wore prison garb, but were very dirty as if they'd been digging in soil. All of them looked angry, and some held tools as if they were weapons. The guy at the front that JJ knew as Tiny started running forward and yelling, Viper! You're gonna get skewered, you son of a bitch! Making us dig out that fucking building with Frank and maybe Pratt inside, or what was left of him? Viper was on his feet running with Tiny close behind. Maybe 6 of the 20 or so guys accompanying Tiny went after Viper. The rest of them reached the campsite and jumped on whoever was there, yelling and screaming at the top of their lungs. It was worse than any prison riot, JJ thought, because there were civilians here. Some of the men went for the women first. Linda had started running and was brought down like a gazelle by a lion. Anyar sat frozen in terror, and soon one of them was on her, pawing at her body and face. Resistance, she thought, is futile, seeing in shadow form the crowd surrounding them, and hearing the screams and grunts and curses and watching them fight like animals. She crawled into her own world, one that was safe, and the external world dimmed. Free pulled Sky to him and covered her with his body, and for a moment they seemed to be ignored, as if they were encased in a bubble, or dead. Then suddenly he was kicked in his lower back so hard that the wind was knocked out of him. He fell into Sky, groaning, falling on top of her and pinning her underneath him. Sky reached out from under Free's body and grabbed the foot of the kicker as he struck again. She pulled and then pushed and threw the guy off balance and brought him down. Before he could move, she shoved Free off of her, and her hand found a non-virtual rock which she used to bash the convict until he stopped moving. JJ took on a couple of them, guys he knew he could beat down fast to level the odds. His men went one-on-one with the others. Amanda struggled, as did Blister. They were used to these guys, how they were, how they acted, what to do to help themselves when attacked. It flashed into JJ's mind that if these kids had been fighters, they might have been evenly matched with the 15 or so still standing. But they weren't. They just served as temporary distractions. JJ hit one guy in the face while another jumped on his back, punching him in the side. He flipped that dude and stomped on his head. Brad was caught. Help Linda or escape. He didn't know what to do. Finally, her screams got to him. He found a log and used it on the back of the gorilla attacking Linda, whose skirts were up and whose underwear was down. Brad had to hit the guy half a dozen times before he fell. He grabbed Linda's hand and pulled her to her feet. She sobbed uncontrollably, but he pulled her along out of the fray. As they ran around the lake, he said, "We'll get stuff from our cabin, some food and hide." It was all he could think to do. Herbert was or wasn't as lucky as the others. He had taken a step, paralyzed with fear, and had been knocked off his feet instantly by a guy running past. His body flew a couple of meters before he fell. His head hit a rock and he went unconscious. Anyar endured the brutality of being raped. Her mind went to her family's gardens back home, in the place she loved to sit under the flowering lilac tree. It was as if she didn't notice what was happening to her body. It was, she thought, one of the advantages of being blind. Her imagination had soared in an early age, out of necessity, and now it came to the rescue of her soul. While Amanda and Blister fought off 2 guys, JJ staggered around the camp, throwing men to the ground and kicking the shit out of them. He had learned early in prison to take your best shots first because you might not get a second. 3 of his 5 guys were on the ground and bloody and looked like they might be dead or close to it. His other 2 guys were still standing, still fighting, and he figured they were doing okay on their own, so he looked for Amanda to help her. Just as he turned, he saw a moron named Guy, who always carried a weapon, slit her throat. JJ was not aware of how he got from here to there. He found himself jumping on Guy, throwing punches with all the force in him. The big guy with the braids went down finally to his knees, and then JJ kicked him over and over in the solar plexus, in the stomach and the face. JJ didn't stop there. He lost track of himself, of time. A red haze covered his eyes until he had beaten the guy to death. By the time he reached Amanda, she had bled out. Everything around him disappeared. He picked up the woman he had loved for 20 years and held her in his arms. He turned her face, her throat still seeping blood. Her sightless eyes stared at nothing. JJ, hardened from all he had been through over the years of brutal living, had not suffered any brutality equal to this. He bent his head over her and sobbed. Viper ran for his life. He knew that he was no match for 6 guys, that he could take Tiny easy. So as he ran, he laid a trap. He reached a clearing that forked 4 ways, including the way he'd come. Viper tore off a shred of fabric from his con suit and hooked it to a tree heading along a path away from him. Then he hid behind a virtual boulder, curling tight so if anybody looked through the translucent rock, they wouldn't necessarily pick him out. He hoped it looked like the rock had a pattern. Then he watched. The 6 men hit the clearing at a run, brandishing weapons. "Which way?" one of them wondered. "Fuck if I know," Tiny said. "Look, he went that way. His suit got ripped." One of the guys held up the scrap of black fabric. "No, it's a trick. I know Viper. Fucker'll snake his way around this somehow," Tiny said. "I'm going this way," the guy with the fabric said. "It's where he went, and I want to make that asshole eat as much dirt as he made me shovel." He headed down the pre-designated path, joined by all but Tiny and one other guy. "I'm telling you, Eddie, this Viper's tricky. I think he's somewhere else." "Yeah, I'm with you." "Look, we'll fan out. You go down there, I'll go this way. He ain't along the road we came, and the guys went that way. No, I think he's somewhere between us, so we got all directions covered." "Yeah," the square-jawed Eddie said, heading at once away from the clearing. Viper wondered if he should follow Eddie and take him out first, but that was risky, and he knew that if he got Tiny first, it would rattle the others. Yeah, he'd stalk Tiny, and when the little dude was far enough away that nobody'd be able to get to him fast, he'd do him good, real good. Yeah. Viper felt renewed. He loved to fight, as long as he was winning, and this would be a good one. It was one fight he was sure to win. Blister had succumbed to the charms of Bailey and Mohammed, 2 of the guys from Cell Block 7. Whatever, she'd been fucked before, gang fucked even. This was nothing. It would be over soon, and then she could get out of here. While Bailey and Mohammed went about their business, out of the corner of her eye, Blister had seen Amanda getting her throat slit. Shit. She'd never liked that bitch, but hell, what a way to go. The place was chaos. Guys lying, bleeding, some never getting up again. The nerdiest of the geeks didn't look too healthy either, lying on his back, pale, looking like he wouldn't make it to daylight. The blind girl was a mirror image to Blister, except she didn't look like she cared much what the other 2 guys were doing to her, for an entirely different reason. Like she was somewhere else. All the rest were out of here. She'd be out of here soon, too. And then she saw him, and couldn't breathe. "Yeah, it's good, ain't it, bitch? I'll make you holler, too," Bailey snarled. She tried to use her hand to point, but Bailey slapped her arm to the ground and clamped a paw around her wrist, as if she were struggling, which she wanted to do, but not for the reason he thought. The giant she saw came from the road that they had all traveled on from the campground. He stood for a moment staring, but not at any of them. It looked like he was staring at the lake. Blister had never seen a guy so big. She wondered if his cock was big too, and what he'd be like. Out of the corner of her eye, she watched him as he made his way to where Anyar was getting screwed. Anyar smelled the lilacs in her mind. Such beautiful flowers. She loved the color, the scent of the blooms. Every spring they came early, and as a child she felt they had come especially for her. Although her mother said that the flowers came early because they had to catch the sun before all the other flowers, so they could spread their sweetness and awaken blossoms everywhere. It was their job. Dimly, Anyar heard something. Then, right in her ear, a yelp of pain. One of the men abusing her suddenly left her completely. Then more slowly, the other moved away and said, "Jesus H. Christ!" She turned her head and saw, as she saw most things, a vague shimmering shadow. This was a large one, and beside it a smaller one that she thought must be a prisoner. The large image couldn't be a man, it was too damn big, yet it was moving like a man. She watched these silhouettes, and it was as if they were dancing together. The large one moved on the smaller one, and moved one of his arms up and down. One of them was screaming. Suddenly, the smaller one's arm seemed to come off in the hand of the larger one. At the same instant, hot liquid flicked across Anyar's naked body. She reached down and touched it with her fingertip and brought that to her nose and smelled it. Blood. Something or someone had bled. The small image moved away fast, the larger one stalking him, capturing him quickly from the scream she heard. She wasn't certain what she was seeing, wasn't certain she wanted to know for sure. It seemed like the other limbs were being torn from the body of the smaller one, but that couldn't be. No one was that strong. She only knew the one guy screamed and screamed long and loud, and then suddenly it was as if he was bent over the knee of the big one and broken in two. The screaming stopped abruptly. Anyar watched impassively, knowing that what she envisioned couldn't have really happened, although she was aware that her heart pounded hard, and she heard a roar in her ears that almost obliterated the sounds of violence around her. The enormous shadow moved toward her. What looked like an arm on one side seemed to be very, very long, much longer than his arm should be. Within seconds, he was standing before her, and she feared she would be raped again. In terror that suddenly zipped up her spine from out of nowhere, as if her soul had been split open, she longed to run screaming. But she knew that she could not and must not move. She looked up, hoping this giant would not hurt her too much. He did not move, and it seemed that what she hoped for would come to pass. "Thank you," she said softly, almost a prayer. His long arm raised high into the air, as if he were bestowing some sort of blessing. She barely felt the pain of the sharp cut at her neck. For a second she was aware of flying through the air, but it was as if she were light as a feather, and did not have her body along with her. Spinning like a ball, growing weak, watching the scene behind her. The shadow bodies littering the ground. The big guy and the shadow he walked away from. What looked like a kneeling girl without a head. Then a miracle happened. For the first time in her life she could see, just like anyone else. And while it only lasted a fraction of a second, like a flash of lightning, what she saw did not make sense to her. A girl kneeling without a head. The naked body with blood spurting from the neck, falling, pitching to the earth. Blister wanted to scream. She struggled, trying to shove these guys off. For her trouble, Bailey just locked her body down, and Muhammad locked her head. She could only watch as what must be Jason cut one guy up the middle and tore the arms and legs and head off another. Then he lopped off the blind girl's head and threw it through the trees. And now he was coming toward the three of them. Bailey got it first, that knife used from behind. It stabbed up and into him around butt level, and lifted him into the air, off Blister, and he howled like an animal. Muhammad didn't click in for several seconds and kept doing what he was doing. But Blister's hands were free now, and she shoved him away from her with her hands and feet, yelling, "Run!" But he still didn't get it. He grabbed her and threw her onto her stomach and fell on top of her before she could get away. Blister was trapped once again. She turned her head and saw Bailey up in the air, his body slowly sliding down the long, long knife, his face twisted in pain. Blister, who didn't usually scream or cry, did this time, and her scream echoed in her ears. She didn't feel sorry for Bailey. Why should she? But she sure felt sorry for herself and what she anticipated would happen. Once Bailey had slid to the bottom of the knife, blood gushing out of him like water from a waterfall, washing over Muhammad and Blister. Finally, Muhammad realized something was off. Jason shoved Bailey forward, and the blade cut through Bailey's back from chest level. Jason pushed him completely off the knife, and Bailey split in two at his back end. He fell on each side of Muhammad. The second he saw Bailey's bisected body, his lust faded. Blister used the opportunity to easy out from underneath him. She jumped to her feet and ran naked, glancing back briefly to watch Jason. The guy was a never-ending source of torture. He made his hands into fists and punched both of Muhammad's ears at the same time. The fists smashed together through flesh and bone and brain, and blood and gray matter burst out of the sides of Muhammad's head, his eyes popping out. Just as Blister entered the woods, she realized that there was no one left alive around Crystal Lake, or alive enough for Jason. Maybe that's why when she glanced back again, she saw him focus on her. He started moving so fast in big long strides, almost like he was running but not quite, and she knew she couldn't outrace him. And there was no point screaming. There'd never been anybody to help her. There was nobody now. All she could think to do was trick him. She saw a big tree and ran behind it. She was skinny enough that standing sideways behind the virtual tree made her look like a stick and hid her completely from view. Jason was no more than 30 feet away, but he passed her by, not sensing she was there. She held her breath and kept as still as the dead. Once he seemed out of earshot, she headed back to Crystal Lake at a good clip. The place was a disaster area. A dozen or more bodies littered the ground. Some had been killed by cons, but at least 5 had been done in by Jason. The ground was saturated with so much blood that the soil looked red. The blood had also reached the water and dripped down the virtual bank. One guy, who had been gutted, hung over the bank, dripping blood out of his mouth like a cadaverous gargoyle. Even the fire that Blister had built, that was still flaming low, stank of burning blood that had gushed onto the logs, and the stench was a new one to her. One she wasn't sure she liked very much. She paused to look at the flames, yellow, red, orange, all the colors that got her hot. Fire, that element that spoke to her that she loved so much. She hated to see a fire go out. She absolutely hated it when that happened, especially one she built herself. She took the time to place a few logs on the low flames, and as she picked them up, she could feel they were dry enough to catch almost instantly. It would make a little inferno, one that soared and roared and fast. No matter how bad life got, there was always fire. It scorched away all impurities and sins in its path, changing everything. She took a step closer, feeling the heat warming her naked body. Suddenly, a sharp pain sliced through her back. She looked down to see the point of a huge metal blade sticking out of her chest, just under her ribs, between her breasts. Then she was lifted up into the air by that blade, the honed edge cutting her up like a wire through a block of cheese as her weight pulled her down. Then she watched herself pitching forward, face first onto the fire. She crashed onto the newly blazing logs, landing on top of those delicious flames as the blade stabbed through them, past the ashes and into the soil below. A foot clamped onto the back of her neck, and she lay across the fire like a hot dog being cooked. Soon the flames began to eat into her stomach and chest and thighs, burning her deep like acid. It was a searing, burning pain, hotter than anything she knew. She had always liked it hot, and then she liked the blisters the heat created on her fingertips when she lit fires. Even as a kid, when she set buildings aflame and watched them burn just for the hell of it. But this was too much. Blister struggled and screamed. Her body flipped around like a fish out of water, pinioned as she was through the chest, where the stab wound ached and ached. Jason's heavy foot crushed into her neck, threatening to snap her spinal cord. She couldn't move away from the burning and could only flap her arms and legs and scream. She liked to burn a little and then move away, but now she couldn't. She was stuck, cooking through and through, smelling her flesh toasting as fire changed her. making her skin swell and crackle like the skin of a chicken, and the muscles beneath roasting like a side of beef. The heat finally reached bone, baking in the fire that felt so hot it would annihilate her, making her organs melt and wiping her existence from the face of the universe, cremating her alive. Blister screamed and screamed, but no one heard. No one had ever heard her screaming. No one but Jason, whose big foot was like a vice insisting that this was a fate she had always wanted, and whose knife pierced her like a giant skewer that told her that she was doomed. He was the holder of her fiery destiny. She had always suspected that something horrible awaited her, but not anything as horrible as this. Viper heard a blood-curdling scream in the distance, one that sounded like Blister. Maybe it was one of the other chicks. Well, fuck them. Or he would, but later. Right now, he had business to take care of. Tiny made his way through the forest, angrily bashing back Virtual Bush. "Hey, Viper! I know you're in here. Show your ugly face, you pussy." When Viper was sure the other guys were far enough away, he stepped out in front of Tiny. "You looking for me?" "Yeah," Tiny said, reaching around behind him for the knife he had stashed in his back pocket. Viper laughed. "You think that's gonna make a difference? Who's the bigger man here? Much bigger." Tiny blinked once. Apparently, in his fury, he hadn't remembered that. "Just words," he said, as if to himself. "Anybody can take anybody at any time. We all know that." "Yeah, anybody with the cojones." "You saying I ain't got any?" "You said it, not me." Tiny lunged with the knife out in front, like Viper knew he would, and had baited him to. He'd seen Tiny fight before. Most guys who'd gone up against him never really had a chance. Viper sidestepped the knife, and at the same time twisted Tiny's other arm behind the little guy and got it behind his back. Tiny tried to swipe behind him, and it only took a second for Viper to catch that arm as well. He bent it back hard and at an angle, dislocating the elbow, and watched the knife fall to the ground. Just to be on the safe side, he kicked his leg up between Tiny's legs, making the littler man howl in agony and double over. Viper let him fall forward almost gently and bent to pick up the knife. It was a shafter, the kind guys made in the joint out of whatever was handy, and this one was made from old metal that had been shaved and pounded to a fine edge. Tiny's cry brought the other guys running. They stood at the path watching, not venturing forward because Viper had the knife, and they all knew he was good with one. He jammed a foot in the small of Tiny's back. "You guys dug real good, and guess what? There is a Jason, and he got out all by himself. He's going to help us get control of these dirtbags. How many of you are with me? How many not?" Square-jawed Eddie was the first one to make a commitment. The redhead was pragmatic, always had been, and knew that he should stick with the stronger side, not the weaker. He stepped forward and said, "Aye, yeah, I'm with you." It didn't take long for the others to agree. "Pussies," Tiny said at them. "Okay," Viper said, his foot still on Tiny's back. "Here's how I see it. We head back to the camp, snag whoever's left, and get ourselves a few hostages while we're at it. At least the chicks. Then we wait. This Jason, he'll find us. Then we can negotiate." Viper looked at the knife blade, touching the edge with his finger, seeing a layer of skin open but not enough to bleed. "Yeah, negotiate," he whispered. "Sounds good," Eddie said. One or two other grunted in agreement. "But first we got to take care of business." Viper looked down at Tiny, still groaning from the dislocated joint. "No room for any weak links here." Before the others could respond, Viper bent down and made a cut at the back of Tiny's neck. The smaller man cried out in pain. Instantly he stopped moving. "You paralyzed him," Eddie said, his voice an odd whisper laced with terror. His square jaw had dropped open like a box. "And? Fucker had it coming. Anybody disagree?" The guys looked fearful, as if they were facing a deranged animal, and had to be careful about what moves they made. "We'll leave Tiny here, maybe come back for him tomorrow." But Viper had no intention of coming back for him, ever. He knew that Tiny would starve to death or die of thirst, whichever the devils of hell deemed appropriate. "Okay," he said, walking away. "We're out of here." He led the motley crew back to the clearing, only to find no living men or women. "Holy shit," one of the guys said as they all looked around. The scene before them was one of mayhem, utter and complete. The known world had been painted red and littered with corpses. The little blind girl was there, or at least her headless body was. Too bad. Viper felt cheated. He should have just fucked her sooner. And on the fire, all charred like overcooked meat, lay Blister, or what remained of her. Viper had a fleeting thought that her skin had all popped up like one big blister, and that was probably how she'd have wanted to end it. For a moment he felt something, and understood it to be the closest he had ever come to a sentiment, and likely ever would. Around them were others, some the victim of fights, clearly bashed and brutalized, but there were a few that had been cut and torn in ways that only a butcher could manage, and then only a butcher who was a giant with a knife like a machete. Viper soon realized that only Jason could have created the cut-up mess before him. One body that didn't have many wounds was one of the geeky kids, the tall, lanky one that had practically shit his pants when he thought he'd have to go somewhere with Viper. Now he had shat and pissed in them too. "See if that one's still got breath," Viper ordered. Eddie turned the body over with his foot, saying, "He stinks." He then bent down and listened at the chest and held a finger under the nose, while with his other hand he pinched his own nostrils. "I don't hear nothing," Eddie said. "Bring him anyway. At least he looks alive. The rest of these guys don't. Maybe he can tell us how it went down." "Who the fuck did this?" Eddie asked, taking for himself the position of second in command by gesturing at two guys to pick up Herbert. The two men begrudgingly lifted Herbert up by the wrist and ankles, both bitching about the smell. "This here, gentlemen, is the work of Jason," Viper said proudly, although he had no idea what Jason even looked like. "Now you know why we need to get him on side fast. We want this guy working with us, not against us. Then the universe is ours." "You got that right," Eddie said. The group trudged back around the lake to the road that led to the cabins. There was no one in sight. "Maybe they're all dead," Eddie said. "Nah, they was at the lake and they couldn't have got away. They're hiding," Viper figured. "Fucking afraid of us." The others laughed as they strutted through the little village of cabins, chests puffed out, as if they'd done something big when none of them had managed to do much but get out of jail. All but Viper. Viper had just killed a man. Viper searched the ground as they walked, looking for drops of blood, and he found them. "Follow me," he said, waving the others toward him. The drops of blood led them to the door of a large cabin. Viper made a motion to the others to keep quiet by putting his finger to his lips. He pointed at the two guys carrying Herbert to put him down and to go to their left. He motioned two others to go right. That left him and Eddie and one other. He positioned the last two beside the door out of sight, and then knocked and entered like he was on the run. Viper opened the door and peered in. "Fuck, am I glad I found you guys," he said, rushing in like he was fleeing from someone or something. Inside, he found JJ, a dead Amanda, and two of the geeks, the one who ran the place, and he guessed his girlfriend. Viper would run the place now, he thought. "Anybody else get away?" Viper asked as if he cared. Well, he did, but not for the reason they thought. "Nobody's here with us, if that's what you mean," JJ said. He looked beaten down. Viper figured that's what happens to a guy who falls for a woman. Viper relaxed. His stance changed from one of a fugitive to that of a confident leader, and the tone of his voice matched. "Well, that's a shame, JJ. A damn shame. Seems I got a few people with me, though. Come on in, boys," he called, and Eddie and the other guys out front entered. The four who had gone completely around the cabin to check it out came in behind them. JJ figured it out real fast. Viper had survived. Maybe nobody else for all he knew. There were another bunch of guys who should have gotten out of the military complex by now, and maybe they'd show up at any minute. Maybe he still had a friend or two, but right now he knew he was vastly outnumbered. "So, JJ, Looks like your days of running the show are over. Looks like I'm in charge now. For now, JJ said. Viper laughed. He strode up to JJ, who stood up for a face-off. But Viper had a knife, and he was good with the knife. JJ was good with his fists. It was no match. Sit down, JJ. JJ sat. Here's how it'll be, Viper said. We're going to find Jason and get him on side. The girl called Sky laughed. Good luck. It don't take luck, sweetie. It takes knowing how to negotiate. The young guy said, You can't negotiate with him. He's not completely human. And don't you think I know that? Then how are you going to make any deals? The girl said. He won't listen to reason. He's a killer. It's all he knows. Viper laughed. Everybody's got their price, missy. The girl shook her head as if he were stupid. He didn't like that. He walked over to her and slapped her good. The young guy jumped to his feet to defend her, and Viper slapped him too. So hard he fell on his ass. His men laughed. While we're waiting for Jason, we're going to keep you guys here. At least you two, he said to the young couple. He turned to JJ. And you? Well, I ain't sure how much use you are anymore. Maybe we'll keep you alive for now, just in case. Viper was silent for a few seconds, obviously thinking about something. Once we get old Jason on side, we'll use the AI to call Earth 2. Then we'll negotiate, so yeah, we'll keep JJ around. Maybe they'll find some value in putting him in the package, since they kind of wanted to keep tabs on you, right? The men laughed for no reason. Free and Sky looked as somber as they felt. JJ was just depressed, not having anything left to fight for. Eddie, put a guy outside the door. The rest of us will have some supper and wait for the other guys. Maybe they'll have Jason with them. Oh, and we got a present for you. He nodded, and two of the guys went outside. They came right back in and hurled Herbert into the room. He hit the floor with a thud. Viper left the cabin, followed by a small crew of cons laughing. The door closed behind them. Free and Sky looked at one another in shell-shocked horror. JJ stared at the dead Amanda. Okay, this has been Chapter 12 of Jason X to the Third Power. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. I thought it was a pretty good chapter myself. A lot of Jason action in there. Let me know in the comment section what you guys think so far. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. Click that like button. And I'll see you very soon with more of Jason X to the Third Power. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80/slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening and have a great night.
I didn't know why.